Welcome, everybody, to the Rabbit Trails podcast. Another sunny day in Europe. Actually, I think it might be sunny in all three locations of our recording today.
Beautifully.
Jolly old London town, where we have Nicole Lewis. Hi, Nicole.
Hello. We are occasionally sunny right now. It was sunny earlier. Now it's doing cloudy.
Nicole Lewis, what is the best month of the year to live in London?
Oh, man. That's a good question. I think May is a good month. May and September.
Okay.
I mean, September is also my birthday, so maybe it's also, I'm partially biased.
What day is your birthday in September?
The 10th.
Mine is the 19th.
Is it?
Yeah, I did not know that we shared a month.
Yeah, it's the greatest month.
It
But
is
I think-
the greatest month.
I think those are, I think May and September. Not that the rest are terrible, but those are particularly lovely.
Listen, in my opinion, May is one of the absolute best months in all of Sweden. So I'm with you there. May is a great month if you live in Europe.
Yeah.
If you live in Texas, it's just more hot.
Summer.
Yeah.
Basically, it's midsummer. What do you mean?
Midsummer.
it's been summer for a couple of months.
In Oregon, I would say it's also the best month in Oregon where I'm from. Like there's just this green, like everything is green, but it's this green that is very hard to describe. It's It's the best green color, like fields, and I don't know. It's
it's
lovely.
the same thing in Sweden. It's that new green that's like untarnished by the dashing of hope, to be poetic about it. But I feel like when I have an idea, that's the color my ideas are. It's unstained by reality. And then by summer, reality is set in and that green becomes a little bit duller. Anyway.
But in T.S. Eliot, he said April is the cruelest month. So there you go.
April can be cruel in Sweden, that's for sure. It can be a brutal month.
It's going to be Freedom Month for me, so I'm looking forward to that right now.
Oh, you guys get out. Yeah, okay, well, here's a good transition
Lockdown.
then. Nicole, tell us, okay, you're in London, but you're not from London. Tell us a little bit who you are.
So offended.
Where you been? Why are you in London?
Okay, so I'm Nicole Lewis. Originally from the state of Oregon, from the west side. I'm trying to make all the transitions work. Anyway, started working for this crazy outfit we know as Crew or Agape in the UK and in Europe. About a year and a half after I finished uni, interesting fact, worked for the US Forest Service. For those of you who know me, you might find that a bit shocking. I actually worked for 3 land organizations when I was going through college. I worked for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, we could do a whole episode on that, for 2 years. I worked for the Oregon Department of Forestry and for the U.S. Forest Service. So being an Oregonian, if I'd worked for the BLM, I would have hit them all. But anyway, worked for the Forest Service in their public affairs office, which is kind of like the PR wing of the Forest Service in a sense. And then, joined this crazy outfit, spent some time in Seattle, Washington, and then moved to Florence, Italy for 10 years, working with the student ministry there, working with students primarily, living it up in Firenze, Italia, which was wonderful. And it was hard, but it was also very wonderful. Food's good.
Nicole, when you were in Italy, I don't remember at what point when I met you, but we've known each other for a very long time. And
very long.
You were always like, you were always a fantastic example. I have a point here, but you always were a fantastic example of someone who embraced culture. I mean, when I thought Nicole, I thought of an Italian. And I got living proof of that because we got to stay, or not we got to.
You did.
My wife got to stay in your incredible apartment where you could look out, was at the bathroom window, and you could see the Duomo.
Yeah, the Duomo was like the whole one side of my flat.
Yeah, so that was the trip in which my wife and I got engaged. So
yes.
I was at, David Carroll's apartment across town. And we got engaged actually in Rome, but I had with me a very special bottle of champagne that my director in Tunisia gave me to celebrate with, at which I also put into your freezer. and promptly forgot about, and it exploded in your freezer. So if you happen to later in life get a shard of glass in your strawberry or something, I'm so sorry, but my champagne exploded in your freezer.
Wow.
I think I noticed that, but I appreciate the confession. 15 years later, Barrett, I'll be mindful to let you stay in my flat again.
Well, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Thanks, Barrett.
So that you were in Italy.
So I was in
did
Italy.
An incredible job in Italy.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was. I feel like it was such. Like I said, it wasn't always easy. I mean, physically, it was not a hard place to have to live, but spiritually, there were some things that were really difficult. But it's now I look back at that time and I think, I feel like God taught me so much. Am I ever going to have a season of my life where I experience that much of the Lord again? I think, I don't know. Sometimes I just feel like the things that maybe I will live on for the rest of my life, feed on for the rest of my life, came from those 10 years there. So spent time there and then moved back to the States for a while, kind of trying to send people overseas, and then came back myself. So now I'm in London, in the SE1, Bermondsey, South London, which I love. I love London. Oh man. People always ask, oh, what do you prefer? London, Italy. It's such a hard comparison because they're very different. Like when I think about Italy, when I watch Italian shows, like there's just this thing in my heart that I don't even experience for my own home state. Like just this affection and love for that place and that time in my life and for my friends. But like London in terms of city is the best city I've ever lived in. Like right now it's very quiet. Going back to the lockdown question, it's very subdued, but normally it's very, I don't know, vibrant and diverse. And there's so much to do. I love London. I think everyone should live here, but right now it's very, we've been in lockdown for quite a while. We were in lockdown. It'll be March 23rd. It'll be a year since we went into our full lockdown. And then we came out of most of it by July, but then we went into these tiered systems. So it was just restrictions. And then the restrictions kind of got progressively harder. So it felt like by October, we were kind of close to being in lockdown in some places. Some places basically we're back in lockdown. And then November, we went back into a countrywide lockdown. And then in December, they put us back in these tiers, which again, we're kind of like being in lockdown, except that in London, we could go to museums, we could still eat at restaurants, and we could go shopping. That lasted for about 10 days. And then we got put back in the strictest lockdown, and we've just been stay at home ever since. So you could go to the grocery store, you can go to the pharmacy, and a few like other essential shops. This is going to sound maybe funny to you, but it's interesting to me. So in the first lockdown, there's this area near my house, Peckham, and they've got all these like hair salons. It's like a Black neighborhood. And I'm like, why are all the hair salons shut down? Like, I don't know if they know anything about like Black women, hair. Like this is like an essential to me. I'm just like, I don't understand why we shut down. Now they're open this time. I was like, oh, good. I was just like, I can't believe you would. Yeah. I'm like, I can't just go down to Boots and buy shampoo, guys. I need like.
Yeah. Well, Spain need so peluquerias, barbershops. What's that? I can't speak English very good anymore.
No, barbershops.
Barbershops, yeah, but also stylists,
hair salons.
They made that essential, so they can't shut them down. They made it essential for people. They made basically in Spain. They said there's certain things we won't shut down again, like schools. They would not. They made it. They guaranteed that schools would stay open no matter what. So we've had a lot lighter lockdown, but they made a lot of things essential. Which, I mean, like for instance, I can still go when things are the non-essential stuff closes down. I can still go to like the deli, which has like the really expensive jamon and wine, and that's seen as essential.
Which that makes sense.
So it's still open. So it's interesting how cultures see what's essential or how they deal with those.
Yeah.
those things. And to me, it seems that there's, not to be critical, but Northern European countries have been very like, there's a lot more rules.
With the exception of Sweden, my friend.
Sweden.
That's true. You guys have taken a very different strategy.
We have taken. We definitely have restrictions. We can only do 8 people meeting now, and 4 people at a restaurant. And there's some things that they've kind of said, okay, we're going to be a little bit more careful. We're getting towards the end. We want to make sure that no one dies unnecessarily. But honestly, my kids have never missed a day of school for getting shut down. They've missed, older kids have had their school move online for some reasons, but so I have had a completely different experience. I've never had to wear a mask except for when I was on an airplane. We did travel to Spain as one is wont to do during a pandemic.
Yes.
Do the Camino de Santiago.
If you can, do it.
That's right. Yeah. So, okay. So Nicole, are you going to be able to get your jab, your shot soon, or how's it looking for you?
I hope so. So the government target is that they'll have everybody. I have way too much information about government targets and dates that things are opening up. Like it's memorized in my head. So by mid-April, April 15th, that's the target date for having everybody 50 and above vaccinated. But they think they actually might get there by April 2nd, which for me would mean that I'm in the next, then they'll go to like 45 to 50 and I'll be in there, just amend my age on a podcast. But anyway, I'll be the next group, which I'm super pumped. I want a vaccine mainly because I do not want coronavirus. If I could order a certain kind of coronavirus, if I could say, hey, I'll get it, but here's like the things I would want, just kind of like a mild irritant, something like that. And then, no long-term effects, that'd be great. But I just think you can't decide which kind of, what
the effects are going to be or how it's going to look.
Yeah. And then the long-term effects for some people are just horrible. And
even young people, some of the long-term effects are really, really rough. Well, I hope that you're able to get it soon. I hope that your country miraculously ends up hitting a target sooner than later, and then can free up some doses for the rest of Europe, because we're still waiting here in Sweden. Not to be angry at the UK government or anything, but
we'll pass them around soon. No, it's really interesting because I don't know if you guys followed this last spring. I mean, the UK government was not winning any points for their response to coronavirus. Everyone was just like, you're the worst. I mean, my friends in Italy were like, I feel so bad for you, Nicole. You're just, but somehow on this end, they're like on it, so I'm grateful for that. But I do think we'll share it. We should. We have enough that we can share.
Yeah. Eventually everything will start where all countries or at least more and more countries are going to be able to get it, and as more and more vaccines come online. So it's just a matter of time. It's fine. I'm not bitter. I just need to be able to get this thing over with before. Nicole, I don't know if you know this. So Victoria and I are stepping out of our role in Sweden.
No.
And we're moving to Spain.
Seriously?
I didn't mean to make this about me, but Garrick is going to be. We're moving to Santiago de Compostela to work with Camino Ministry.
What?
So come August, we will. We're in a transition phase right now, and we'll be moving down to Southern Europe. And anyway, it would be nice if I can get my vaccine before I.
Yes. Oh man, congratulations. I had no idea.
Yeah, it was a small development that started happening, and we were able to work it out. So we just recently sent out our newsletter and stuff. So now we're kind of talking about it more publicly.
The Garrick and ZU magic has finally worked. They're really good. They've been
Camino magic.
They've been slipping us chorizo for years. It's finally paid off.
It's all the pork products
and the wine.
Oh goodness. Well, okay. So Nicole, you have, as you pointed out, you have oodles of experience being overseas.
Did I point that out?
Well, you didn't point it out.
We're going to point it out.
I am going to highlight your experience of being in Italy and being in the UK, and both of those, while there are similarities between the two, of course, because of postmodernism and post-secular
Right.
and post-Christian and everything. They're also very different. And we could go into those. And as you've said before, both of those taught you many things about your life and ministry.
Right.
You highlighted when you were referencing Italy just a few minutes ago, I really resonated with what you said, that 10 years taught you so much. God taught you so much about yourself, but also kind of it was similar to, I feel like I was in Central Asia a shorter period of time, just a few years, but that experience, I feel like, got into my blood, and the things that I learned there, I can't get out. They were such formative years. But what were some of those things that you learned during that time in Italy that kind of stick with you today? And then what I would say with that is, how do you carry those into your ministry and your life in the UK?
That's a good question, Barrett.
Besides your love of pasta and
beside my love of pasta, the obvious one. Well, that's it. That's the answer to that question.
All right.
Gelato covers a multitude of sins.
I know. Actually, speaking of gelato, so my neighborhood gelateria in Florence, Badiani, which is, they actually won an international award. So they have 4 locations in London.
No way.
And 2 of them are right by my house. Well, right by my house being a relative term. One is like a little cafe that serves their gelato, which is probably like a 15-minute walk from me. And another is like a actual kind of gelateria stand that is about 25 minutes. So I feel like there are so many things actually, even about my house and neighborhood, that God gave me that remind me of Italy, like the tiglio. I'm trying to think of that, linden trees. That was one of the things I was going to miss about Italy, was the smell of jasmine and linden trees in the spring. And I moved into this house and I have a courtyard full of trees. They were dead by the time I got here in the fall. They're all linden trees.
No way.
All linden trees. Anyway, okay. So what did I learn in Italy besides my love for gelato and linden trees? I think, okay, so this is probably a few years in. I mean, I think I started noticing this, but it kind of catalyzed when our friend Gary Runn moved to Italy, and we started trying to kind of look at the ministry and what we were noticing in terms of how students were coming to faith. Like, we're just trying to do a lot of just analysis of what's true, how can we be doing ministry more effectively. And I think this thing that had kind of been stirring in my heart for a while, it started kind of personally my first year, where I had what I like to call my Jesus revolution, where I just really started looking at Jesus and what he did, and just kind of how that, what impact does that have on my life? What impact could that have on the lives of students? And I think just seeing this disparity where I was living in a city and in a culture where I'm just kind of surrounded by Jesus, right? He's in museums, painted, he's in churches, streets are named after him. I remember being in Venice, there's a bridge called Christ Bridge. I mean, he's literally all around. And yet at the same time, almost like he's there, but not, kind of this like, I don't know, what do we call it? Like a ever-present nothing. Like he's there, but he's not there. Yeah. And so I think for me, that just started challenging some of the ways that I thought about Jesus. I think it started challenging what I desired then for people to know about Jesus. And it kind of formed what I thought was how I need to live my life, or even how as a team we need to approach ministry, was recognizing that there's this ever-present Jesus who's everywhere and nowhere. And what we need to do is help him to come off the walls of building and be like in the streets, like that people can touch and taste and feel and experience in our lives. Like we need to, so we started talking about, instead of saying, what's your testimony? We would say, what's your life change story? How has Jesus actually changed your life? What is he doing to change your life? Not this Jesus that did something thousands of years ago that we have lovely paintings about, that we celebrate once a year, twice a year, but the Jesus who is very much alive, very much present and living, and in the process of shaping and transforming me through his spirit. Like, who is that, and how are we going to make him known to people around us? And so I think from that, as I was kind of still in the midst of this Jesus revolution, as you guys know, I started studying and spending a lot of time in John 21 and like looking at the sermon between Jesus and Peter and just kind of seeing how Jesus really challenges Peter and his love for him, but in a way that really, for me, I look at that passage and I think what Jesus is trying to say is, will you love me more than all other things, above all other things, and before all other things? Because that is the place that if you will plant your stake there, like will keep you going in the right direction for the rest of your life. And so that's, yeah, I feel like that's kind of the 10 years what I began to see and do. And when I moved to the UK, before I came here, I was actually at a staff conference and I was trying to decide, should I move to the UK? Do I really have what it takes? I don't know. Should I say yes to this? And I remember Leslie, I went to a staff conference and our country director, Leslie Cheeseman, was speaking. And one of the things that she spoke about was her dream for Agape UK, that we would be people who would love Jesus with all of who we are, that would be true of who we were. And I thought, okay, I may not know how to do this job that they're asking me to do, but I do know how to do that. And not only do I know how to do that, it's the one thing I actually really care about and love. And so that was I feel like that's the moment that God kind of said, yeah, this is what I have for you next. So, I mean, I think in my reality here in the UK, that's where I still try to push people towards, maybe more now on the staff side of things than the students, because I'm not with students as much. But I think just really I think sometimes in ministry, you can, you guys know, you can run around all crazy and get caught up in the stats and, we've got these goals and we've got to make them. And it's not that those things are bad, but I think you can easily lose focus on your first love. I mean, it's a very simple thing. And so I'm kind of a first love first, everything else is second. That's just, and I could be wrong.
In an activist organization, as I think this is the activist organization part is a very British or UK, United Kingdom sort of thing. I think it's a way that they express it. And I think that's probably one of the first places I realized it sunk in. Oh, we are an activist organization. When I was talking to it might have been John McNeil, might have been Leslie. I don't remember who, but how we have a lot of energy that we spend in trying to change the world, right? How have you found that focus? I love Leslie's heart in that, and I know your heart. So how have you found that focus to help people love Jesus and deepen that love with Jesus? How have you found that received and then I would say processed among various staff and or students that you are involved with? Because so much of the time the activities that we do aren't necessarily about loving Jesus. They're about proclaiming the love of Jesus, but those can be different things.
Yeah. Honestly, I think it's hard. Because because we do have so many activities we want to do and things that we want to achieve. And again, those are not bad things in and of themselves. Like, we need to have something we're focused on and going after, else people are going to kind of flounder and flop around and not really know what they're doing. But I think it can really quickly eclipse the Jesus side of things. I think something that our organization, I want to say globally, but I won't say that because I can't say that with confidence of every single country I've been in or every single country we're even in. But I think at least in the US, maybe in the UK to some extent, Italy, I think one of the things we're not good at, like, we talk a lot about wanting to see students come to faith. Obviously, it's very core to who we are. Wanting to help students then grow in that relationship with Jesus and kind of go out into the world, to be that, into the city, into their businesses, into full-time Christian work maybe, and really have an impact there as people who multiply their life. I think what we're not good about is thinking about, okay, well, that's good that we want other people to be like lifelong disciples of Jesus, but what about us? Like, we also are still, we may be in Great Commission work, but we're still part of the Great Commission, not just because we work for it, but because we're also disciples and followers of Jesus. So we can't just spend, Go ahead, Garrett.
And this might be particularly acute for us because our bread and butter is taking people who became a Christian or come to some kind of Great Commission awareness, like myself, is and taking them at a very young age and going, okay, now you do it. Which there's a beauty in that, because we don't believe you got to go and do 10 years of study, and we put people into the game really quick. But we're putting young people in the game who maybe don't have, who need that focus. I probably needed that focus a lot more, as opposed to just go do it. But
yeah. So I guess I probably haven't really asked, is this well received? I'm just kind of doing, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Sorry, Leslie. Not in a bad way. I mean, I'm not trying.
I don't think Leslie would disagree with you. I mean, I'm
not actively undermining the organization or anything like that, but it's just, I'm like, I'm going to hold that as something that I really feel is important. And I want to push my staff to, or any students that I work with toward. And, and I feel, I guess, fairly confident about that. Also, because I know I'm not the only person who's ever going to be in someone's life, whether they work for us or whether they're a student involved in our ministry. Like, they're going to learn to walk with Jesus from a lot of people, some of them living, some of them dead, like the people we read about, or, read their stuff that are no longer with us. But I just think they're gonna, there's gonna be a greenhouse of growth that's gonna happen through their whole life, and my life is just a small part of that. So, I kind of intend to use that space that I've been given to push people toward that and let other people do other things. But I do think it's, I think it's a hard thing. I think I feel this tension even as a leader sometimes, where I'm like, oh, I should be like, thinking more lofty goals. Maybe it's just, I'm not really wired that way sometimes, but I'm like, it's okay.
Well, it's because, I've gone through an evolution over the last, I don't know, however many years. And, I think ministry in a context like Western Europe will begin to, let's say, beat the measurements out of you. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. So one of the things that I just think is so important is, how are we remaining faithful to Jesus, and how are we, as Eugene Peterson says, discipleship is what is it? I'm brutalizing the quote.
A long obedience in the same direction.
Yeah.
Which is actually a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche.
That's right.
Is it really?
Yeah, he took it from Nietzsche.
I did not know that.
Way to go, Eugene Peterson.
That's why I come to the Rabbit Trails podcast. I learn something every time I come here.
Got it from Nietzsche.
It's a great quote. It's a great quote.
Yeah, it is a fantastic.
And Bono used it a lot too. So
yeah.
But I think that's something. I was talking to someone recently about, the idea of movement. And I want to see as many people come to Christ, and those people learn how to take that to other people. So I'm not at all poo-pooing that idea. What I think, though, is that we have to continually be attached to the person of Jesus Christ and walking with him. And that out of that learning the heart of the Father, we express the heart of the Father in evangelism and discipleship much better than if we're just learning a skill set. And so I think I love that. And I've always known that to be true of you for as long as we've known each other, that you exude stick close to Jesus. And I think that's contagious. So I get it. It's interesting, as you were talking about Italy and what you and Gary were thinking of, and kind of how do people come to Christ and everything else. That was a good number of years ago. But it's interesting because some of the most cutting edge, so to speak, kind of thinking about evangelism that's kind of accepted as, hey, this is how people in secular postmodern societies are going to come to Christ. You guys were already on the front edge of that, figuring it out. I think one of the things that I'm taking away from Sweden, and I think maybe applies, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, to Italy as well, is just the idea that because you can't stick, because you don't have easy success with proven methods, so to speak, you're on the front lines of figuring out, how do we do this? It doesn't mean that your numbers, quote unquote, are going to go up, but rather that you're learning how people process and assimilate the gospel into their lives. Did you see that? Do you feel like that's true, that you guys really were, I don't know, seeing that lived out?
I think that we were. I think for us, there were kind of two key moments, which were very different than how I think I'd been trained to think. So one of them was just when we started hearing students talk about how they came to faith. I think there were like 4 things that were always true. Like they'd heard multiple life change stories from either the Bible or from people. At some point they'd been exposed to the Bible. Maybe someone had handed them a Bible randomly someplace, or they started reading it maybe at a Bible study that we had. There was usually like a hard question that they need to have answered. And I should remember the 4th one, but now, and they started to experience kind of Christ-centered community. Mm-hmm. And that was just a very different way of thinking. I think in my mind, I'm like, well, what Bible studies are we going to do? Or what evangelists are we going to do? Surveys? Or, that was kind of how I thought about doing ministry. I hadn't really thought about it in terms of how do we align everything we do around these 4 things that seem to be true about how people come to faith. But I feel like at the time when we started intentionally focused on that, we actually started seeing more students even continue to, come to faith. And we tried things that were uncomfortable, and some of them worked well and some of them didn't, but we were just kind of like, we're going to stick with this. I think the other key point for us is when we really started looking at relational networks within the culture and just seeing how, there's a lot of sense of community that people have. So sometimes you find that people are friends with the same people for their whole life, which happens all over the world. But I don't know, maybe this is true about Spain. It's kind of like people are in these same communities like for a lifetime. And so
I think it's very Mediterranean cultural value.
Yeah. So, we finally started saying, okay, we need to figure out then how to work in the network rather than kind of create our own network that we're trying to pull them out toward. And it seems like this is a much more in the culture way to work. And I feel like those were game changers for us and laid the foundation kind of for what would come in the future. So,
okay, but here's sorry.
Hope it's still been useful. Go ahead, Garrett.
No, so I have a question, because I think this is maybe a crux of something we talk about, because that stuff doesn't look good on a stat sheet, or it's really hard to So for one thing, I would say the stat sheet's the problem, but how do we? So I think, how do we express? Because you're talking about a very what you're saying resonates with me, being spending quite a bit of time now in a Mediterranean country where those things have to happen. And I also, so a question I had before we get back into that question, a question that goes into that: did you see that it took people like months, maybe years, before they became a Christian?
Yeah.
Is that a comment? Yeah, that's what we see in Spain.
It took time, and it even took. It's funny, we did. So we thought, okay, well, if we should get the Bible into people's hands. Let's just start handing out Bibles. I mean, if that's, which after we did that, I met a number of people at random events who were like, I became a Christian because someone handed me a Bible on campus. I was like, okay, this is just a thing. But we did it once. It didn't go so well. We were like, oh, that was a terrible experience. But we thought, okay, no, let's try it again. So we partnered with the Gideons and went and handed out New Testaments. And there were, I think it was four or five women who we'd known for 2 years, who we'd been friends with, who we'd shared the gospel with. We were just like, I don't know if anything is moving at all. And just from doing the Bible distribution after 2 years of being friends with them and talking to them about Jesus, one of them said to one of my teammates, I've always really wanted to read the Bible. especially the Old Testament. I've just never had a chance. So we started reading the Bible with her. She eventually came to faith about a year and a half later. Another one who, again, told my friend, like, oh, I'd really like to read the Bible. And she was like, oh, we should do a study, you, me, and Nicole. She still hasn't come to faith yet, but still is very much searching. And then the other three were students that we had met, again, who were like, oh, I'd really like to study the Bible. And like one of them came to Christ. It was just, yeah, my point was it did take a while. I mean, that was after 2 years of relationship. And then we did that, and then it still took time. So it wasn't an overnight thing.
Garrick, did you have another question? Because I have a follow-up.
Well, no, it was that because I feel. I mean, so this is maybe a rabbit trail, but I feel like Mediterranean countries, I think Europe to some degree. For instance, I don't know how, for instance, organizations keep stats on working in a Muslim country or a country like North Korea, closed countries.
Yeah.
But I assume they don't go, that no one's looking, they're like, well, you didn't go out and do 8,000 random exposures this year.
Right.
We have a problem with that. Okay. Because they understand the context that that's not an applicable. So this is something I just really struggle with. Like, how do we communicate what we're doing? Because I believe that is exactly what you should be doing, and it's obviously bearing fruit. And when we did that switch in Spain, we also, okay, well, there's not a lot to report, but we're seeing people trust Christ.
Right.
So I could go back to the old way where we didn't see anyone trust Christ, but there was a lot to report. Or so I guess that's that's the tension I feel.
Yeah.
With. So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, this is another thing I think our organization sometimes doesn't do well, is learn how to, it's like we contextualize everything for everyone outside of us, but then like we can't contextualize inside the house, which I'm always confounded by. And I think statistics or how we define movements, I think it falls kind of within that. Okay, how are we thinking about how do we contextualize this in a way that actually works within the culture that I'm working with? And I feel that tension, Gary. I think it's not like again years ago. So we had a category on our stat sheet called gossiping the gospel. And we counted it. We're like, counts. And kind of what we meant by that was, let's say I met a student, told them I was part of this Christian student group. Maybe that was it. Or met them, told them, here's kind of some of the things we're doing, but it wasn't any, here's how you can have a relationship with Jesus. But we're like, gossiping the gospel counts. Like, we just need to be out there doing that. Now, it doesn't fit nicely onto a stat sheet, but we actually ended up sharing the gospel more when we actually had more categories on there that people kind of walk through. So I think it's hard though, because this is probably way above my pay grade, but I think we're still sometimes living in this season of missionary work where things were reported in a certain way, and that, it's really good and people love that. And there's kind of, I think sometimes still that expectation without recognizing that the culture has changed, or maybe even the context has changed. And I think, but it's above my pay grade.
Although you could just,
you could just bump yourself
up my pay grade.
Up your pay grade.
Just so I can say no longer above my pay grade.
I make more than anyone. There's a guy we read a lot, Stefan Paas. He's made the point that the idea that A plus B always equals C is a very modernist way of looking at life and ministry. And historically it's not a true corollary of the church, right? The church has not always, through its faithfulness, always seen constant, continual, random multiplication and growth. And that, so we want that, but also, could we be all right without it? I think is the question. Like, why are we forcing ourselves? For me, this is my big question. Is like, the church doesn't always grow. It doesn't always grow the way we want it, and sometimes the church suffers and is just for centuries. That's different areas of the church live that way, and it dies out sometimes and is reborn. So
and sometimes God wants to
be the
sometimes God was glorified by a small dwindling church's faithfulness to live out Jesus, and the culture still rejects them, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's something I was never able to put words on until probably past, but it might have been before, but I think it's so important. I think I also wonder, and this gets to some of the missionary activity that I think is so important. So we all three have spent the majority of our adult lives crossing culture.
Yep.
In your experience, Nicole, in the two cross-cultural locations that you have been in, it's interesting. You always hear the misnomer. We were talking about this the other day on our staff team. You always hear, the outsider, or not, sorry, that nationals can reach everyone better than anyone else. So you kind of want to, get an Englishman in that spot as soon as possible, or whatever else. But in my experience, I'm not sure. You mentioned the two girls who studied the Old Testament with you. I wonder if they would have studied the Old Testament right away with an Italian. Like at some point, sometimes I think people are open to things. At least I know here in Sweden, sometimes people are a lot more open to talking about Jesus because I'm seen as a non-threatening, or at one point I was a non-threatening entity, or I was less threatening, or I was interesting. I said it only because technically now I have a Swedish passport, so I don't know how I'm perceived now, but
Right.
My Swedish is not good enough for anyone to think that I'm a local. So
Yeah.
But do you think the outsider still has a place?
I do. I mean, I think that, and it's probably, it probably varies by country, but I think sometimes the outsider can be a bridge builder between two insiders in a way that someone who is inside actually, can't necessarily do it. Just because I think, there are those barriers that do exist. For people, even within their own cultures. And so, I think one of the things we talk about here is like, we'd love to see a ministry in Scotland one day, but we can't send English people because there's, we could probably send Americans up there, maybe Welsh people, but just, even though we're all part of the UK, there still is that barrier. It's a little bit different than what you're talking about, but I do think there's still, I think there still is a place. I don't think that someone who's coming from a different culture has, no like role to play, but it might be a very specific thing. I still think, well, it's interesting in London because London is it is a British city, but it's a very international city. So, I think I would feel different about myself as an American if I didn't live in London and maybe live someplace like Nottingham, which is not particularly, multinational like London. But in London, there's actually a quote, I'm probably going to mess it up. It's from the Paddington Bear book. And it says, in London, everyone is different, and that's why everyone can fit in. And we're just, it's very, I don't see that as being an extreme barrier for other people. But I do think that sometimes when you're kind of like in your example, Barrett in Sweden, that sometimes you can be a bridge builder for people in a way that even someone from their own culture can't, because there are things about that have baggage and history attached to them that you don't necessarily have.
Yeah. I mean, I still use English to start off conversations if I'm randomly talking to students, because they'll have that conversation. And then at some point in the conversation, I'll switch to Swedish, and they're always kind of like, why were you speaking English? And I was like, well, you wouldn't have even talked to me if I had been speaking Swedish. And they're like, yeah, that's a good point. You're right. So it's kind of like me presenting it that opens them up within their own comfort zone in order to begin that conversation. Now, once I've had that, then we can go a little bit deeper. So I don't know. I think it's part of that is I just think that it's kind of like in different parts of the world where different success has been had in our organization. I know that even though the ministry itself has been turned over to a nationally run ministry and everything, they still want young people to come on internships because those young people have a way of building those bridges and making inroads that maybe, a national can't. And so I still think there's value to that.
Well,
so
I think there's something deeper about it still. I think the Christian message is a universal message that is cross-cultural in its very core and very being. And who we are, we're called, I mean, and throughout the Old Testament and New Testament and, through Great Commission, and we see this continual crossing of cultures. And so I think there's something very Christian and very servant-hearted, very sacrificial about, say, I leave, like Jesus, I leave where I'm from to go somewhere else and become like those people, to love them. And so I think there's, even though that sometimes there's resistance to that, and even now I think we see it even in our own Christian world, there's some resistance to that. But I think there's something core about that ability to cross a culture, to say, I give up certain rights and certain things to love you, that I think even in a kind of jaded secular West, I think people still have to ask that question. And so I think if we lose that ability to cross cultures as Christians, I think it's a very dangerous thing. So that would be my perception on it. I think it's essential to who we are. Doesn't mean everyone has to do it all the time, but it is part of our task.
I think we need to, even if you're not going to leave the like confines of your own home state, like if you're from the US, at least seeking to understand, if anything else, someone else's lived experience that is very different from yours, acknowledging that there are other experiences that are different from yours. Because I do agree. I think this is one of the things I really appreciate about Jesus. He was having conversations with people that really made some people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But he was willing to cross, because that was, this is obviously goes back to Abraham and God's plan for the world and for that Genesis. But I mean, there isn't this kind of like, okay, this is only good news for me. This is only good news for certain people. This is good news for everybody. And if we're going to be about everyone, then we've got to not only be willing, like you said, Garrick, to like lay down maybe even who I am. I mean, I think this has been a struggle for people in lockdown who maybe come from a different country and they're like, well, in my country, we're doing this. Why aren't we having more freedom here? And it's just like, well, but that's part of the sacrifice that you make to come here, is that you've laid down your right to be able to be there and have those things, to adopt what everyone else around you is experiencing. But I think, we need to have this, I think, acknowledgement that, how do I understand someone else's lived experience that is different than mine, even if I'm not going to actually cross, quote unquote, international borders to do it.
Yeah.
Nicole, what is one of the most difficult things you have found in your time overseas about crossing culture for you, just personally?
This is a good question. Should have been more prepared.
We don't prepare here.
Now the extemporaneous. Okay, let me try and I'm not good. I still haven't, all the years of ministry, still don't have the blag gift where I can, I hear a question and I answer in a way that makes me sound like I've just my ages thinking about it. It's just it's not a spiritual gift I have yet. What has been the hardest thing about crossing?
Or a hard thing. It doesn't have to be the hardest, but it can be a hard thing.
Oh man. I want to say nothing. No, I really like crossing.
Well, you've been crossing cultures in a way your whole life.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. So I'll try and come to something hard, but I think, I'm mixed. So my dad is I'm going to say is, though he was Black, African-American. My mom is white, European, Swedish heritage, which I always like to brag about.
Yeah, you meant so.
So, I grew up mixed and in a really small all-white town in Southern Oregon with those very like from 1 to 5, my dad's job was like this multicultural. He worked in a very diverse setting in the middle of the forest. I won't go into details about it, but it was kind of like I grew up in a mixed neighborhood in an all-white logging town. So that was kind of like my reality that I lived in for the first 5 years of my life. So, but I think, yeah, I think because of that, kind of having to navigate living in these two worlds, I necessarily felt like I always fit in nicely. And so for me, moving across culture and being kind of different wasn't like it didn't even feel like a new reality. I was like, oh, well, like, here we go again. This is just kind of normal part of life. So I think that part has been easy. I think probably the hard thing is always just realizing how much you've got to learn the culture you're living in. I think that's the hard thing. It can be a really fun thing because you're getting to like get in there. And, I moved to Italy. I never studied Italian language nor history. So I showed up I had like listened to some cassette tapes I borrowed from the library, had about 6 phrases and could count to 10. And that was it. And so I just had to pick everything up from nothing. And I think it's hard because it's also very humbling, because you realize that you can learn a language, but when you learn a language, you also have to learn the culture that goes with it, because a lot of language actually is tied to cultural things that have happened in history. And if you don't understand that, it's hard also to speak fluently, even in the language. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of humility. Like, you realize I sound like I'm about 3 years old, and this is so embarrassing. And I can't, I remember my first year in Italy, I was like, I think I'm really funny, but I can't even be funny in Italian. And I would try to be funny. And now looking back, I wish I had videos of it. Oh, I would try and tell these jokes literally when I'd had about 2 months of Italian language class. I don't know what I thought I was doing, but people did not understand me at all. I didn't even understand what I was saying, but I would laugh. And I mean, people were really kind. They really liked me. So they were patient, but you feel like you have lost. I just was like, there's this whole part of who I am that I cannot express in another language. And it's very frustrating to me, but I want to be able to do it. But it's also really humbling, because you realize I've got a lot to learn. And I think, in the UK, I have the advantage that I speak English. So that's good. Clearly haven't developed a British accent. Only when I ask questions like, what's a good one? Where's the loo? And I kind of do this little like inflection at the end, because I feel like people understand me more. Do you have a bag? But that's it. So, English is common, but still there's a lot of things about UK culture. There's English culture, there's, within the UK, or even like where I live, like there's the Afro-Caribbean community, Black British, African, Black British, Caribbean, cultures within cultures. And so it's just, it's like you're having to do a lot of learning. And I really like it, but it's hard. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to rock up here and just kind of go on my merry way. And I kind of think actually I haven't done the best job in England. I've been thinking about this a lot of really trying to understand all the nuances of British culture. I think I've just sometimes have been like, oh, well, I'm just moving forward. If I'm making mistakes, let me know, but I just don't have time. But I think I probably need to take some more time. But I mean, it's just, I think that part is hard. It's hard work. It's work,
Yeah, it is, isn't it? That's actually one thing as we transition into Spain that I keep going, okay, I get to go be a real missionary again. Cause I've been in Sweden for 13 years and I feel like I kind of know how things work and everything else. And now it's like, I get to go back to that space of feeling like I know nothing, which for me, it's interesting is a little bit of a comfortable spot. I'm not saying I'm going to knock it out of the park. I think I'm going to have lots of struggle. But there's that sense of that had become a familiar place for me. And so to begin accessing that will be interesting. Right. So I really resonate with a lot of what you said. What's one of the greatest joys about crossing all those cultures?
Oh man. And mean, I just think you get to just experience some really fun thing. I think you get to experience great people when you do it, and relationship that, yeah, will be with you for the rest of your life. I think there are parts of you that just will forever be changed by that culture and by the people. I think there are ways, maybe I felt this especially very poignantly in the last year in the political climate, particularly in the US, looking over across the pond, of just what it's like to have to go in another culture and have to look at yourself as a person and a nationality from a completely different point of view, and realize, oh, okay, wow. I remember the first conversation I ever had about the death penalty with a student, which was not something I'd experienced in the US, and being really challenged by that and kind of being like, oh, I need to think about this. Like, but this is very, we're coming at this from very different ways. And, why do I actually think the things that I do about that? So, but I think it's good. I think it's really good to have your culture challenged, and even your assumptions. And you guys, I probably have talked about this on your podcast, even your views of Christian faith, and realizing that around the world, there are Christians who love and follow Jesus, who actually think very differently about things that you hold as kind of core to the Christian faith because they're part of your culture, but maybe they're not really actually culturally very, very Christian at all. So I think that's honestly some of the best parts. And I think, like going back to what I was saying about learning about Jesus, like, I just think there are things about the Lord that I've gotten to see and experience in ways, because I've had to push myself outside my home culture, that I just don't know if I would have experienced in the same way. Maybe I would, but I just don't think, I think that I probably wouldn't have, had I not been willing to go outside.
Once you step outside and you start engaging with faith, you start to read and understand Jesus in a completely different way. You can't help but do it. And that's just one of the benefits of being a missionary. And so Paul says in Romans chapter 1, I long to be with you for basically the exchange of faith, to be encouraged by your faith and my yours. And there's that sense there of, like, I always read it and I used to think, how could Paul possibly be encouraged by imparting the gift of imparting faith to these people? How could he get faith from the people he's ministering to? But that's part of the cross-cultural endeavor, is you're actually learning a lot about yourself, but also your cultural understanding of God, and even baggage in some case of, oh, this part is really just a reflection of my culture and not about who Jesus is. So some pretty cool stuff, and important to think about.
Yeah. Thanks. It's fun. It's challenging again, but it is a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is.
Garrick, you were about to.
I was, I mean, this is a really fascinating conversation, and I've got, a lot to say, but then also
say it.
But then also I was wanting to make some jokes about England. So, so I got the two.
If you keep them to Paul Duncan, you can make
Paul. Well, I think you're right. It's I would just agree with you guys. The ability to have to cross a culture and kind of relearn things. Really, it's incredibly humbling and humiliating at times.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can all. We probably need the three of us start writing stories, like the stories of where we've just totally
the
fallen. The humble, or some of them are quite good, but I think so you brought up something that was very interesting earlier, Nicole, about even just going across the street, and being willing to take, and it seems like we're more and more we're in times where I really struggle, for instance, with the Spanish evangelical churches, often a church that will not go across the street to talk to the other person. I don't know how things were in Italy or how the UK is. Certain countries, you sense the church has more of a leader, takes more of a leadership sense on that, on being what we might say missional, but just that willingness to give up and become Jesus in a certain way to somebody. But what do you think needs that as we work with students sometimes that are resistant to that? Because we're talking back to the discipleship, loving Jesus. Right. How do we help people see that? Like even just knocking on the door of your neighbor who might be different than you or might be very much like you, but let's just say they are very different. They're a different culture, different background, different, because we're in this fractured, we're in this fractured society, right? Everyone, right. We're no longer homogenous really in Western world anymore. We're all over the place. How do we help people begin to do those things? The simple thing, right? Thing, crossing the street.
Crossing the street. I'm gonna try to answer this, and this might be a bit of a ramble because I feel like I'm kind of processing. This is something I'm trying to process right now. I think in some ways, now this is not to say that people aren't doing this, but I feel like maybe there needs to be more focused intention on how we think about discipleship, or maybe even like a reevaluation of the things that we think about when we think about discipleship, and then how does that live itself out in like loving my neighbor. So a friend of mine recently said to me, I don't think we're not really good at like bringing together the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. It's like we kind of separate. We're for one, or maybe we're for the other, but like we can't really seem to like bring them together. Or we don't bring them together. And I think that Barrett's heard me wax eloquently about this before, but the disciples of Jesus, so the disciples at that time, like they were meant to really become what their teacher was. Like everything that their teacher did, they, were also going to do. They prayed like their teacher prayed. They, they imitated their teacher. Yeah. It was like, if you looked at the student, you could tell who his teacher was. And so I think that, if that's true, which it is, and we look at that in terms of discipleship today, and we're meant to be doing the same things that Jesus did, I think what you clearly see is a love and a care for your neighbor that even puts you in a position of feeling very uncomfortable, sometimes even making other people uncomfortable, let's be honest, but in uncomfortable positions. But I don't know. I think that somehow it's gotten a little bit missed, either because the reflection is like, here's a lesson we're going to talk about in discipleship, which is about love, rather than this isn't a lesson. This is supposed to be the embodiment of who we are as people who are now under like, the lordship of Jesus. My life is now hidden with God in Christ. I'm meant to be becoming like Christ. This isn't just a lesson I learned in discipleship. This is actually me being a disciple. So it's not a thing I do, it's just a thing that I am. And I think I don't know, this is very articulate. I think a lot about like all the things that come under discipleship. Now, I told you guys earlier, even, kind of how do we bring in even like issues around racism into discipleship, because for some people, it can be a lesson they learn. For other people, it's like the living reality. It's like my physical body actually impacts that. So for me, this isn't like an extra lesson I get to learn. It's part of, who I am as a person. And so I think loving my neighbor, maybe we've sometimes seen it more in the lessons I'm learning rather than an embodiment of who I am as a disciple of Jesus. And so I don't know. I think we need to talk about Imago Dei and what's the image of God mean? Why is it important that people are valued? It's not, that's not being political. That's not like being woke, trying to make a, some kind of statement. That's just like the reality of the scriptures. And I think we need to bring that back into our understanding of people, and then our understanding of neighbor, and our understanding of ourselves. I'm trying to put it all together in my head right now. So hopefully that
like,
makes sense.
No, I think it totally does. It feels that often, I think in our models, at least the ones I'm more familiar with, and this is not everything. I want to be careful because like there's obviously a lot of
Right.
people out there doing different things.
Right.
But
It's not like no one's talking about loving your neighbor.
Yeah, yeah.
Please don't hear me say that.
Yeah. But what we tend to go to is, well, these are the things you know, right? You need to know about these, which are important to know. I'm not saying we shouldn't know about the Trinity, or we shouldn't know about, being filled with the Holy Spirit, or we shouldn't.
Transubstantiation.
Yeah. Those are all good things to know and be a part of our thing. But I think we make it very, and let's be honest, we've also very, in some sense, we've made the gospel very much about, well, don't do these certain things. Shouldn't drink too much, or depending on where you are in the Baptist Anglican spectrum, don't drink at all, or only drink at church events. So or
only there, Garrick. Only there.
only at missions,
as we did often in church
events
in Italy.
So where as opposed to saying, well, what do I really do? How do I love my neighbor? Or what does Jesus really want from me? What does he want me to do? As opposed to like, what do I need to know? And then I think what do we need to know? And then how do we transpose the information that I know now to someone else? Tends to be the kind of the job, which once again is part of it. I think is part of that, but we've left out the that part where it's like, okay, well, now what do I really do? And how do and what does that mean for myself ethically?
So part of it maybe is, I don't know, I'm spitballing here, but I've often thought about how often when we try to communicate something to people, we forget the assumptions that underline our persuasion. Mm-hmm. So like if I want you to believe something that I think is really important, I can find myself almost in awe that you don't value it as much as I do. Right. But I forget the reasons, the process of which how my values got there. And so I think sometimes in the process of trying to get people to go across the street, knock on their next door neighbor's door, we forget the part of the Father's heart that we're learning that caused us to cross the street in the first place ourselves. And then we have this experience and we think, isn't that great? Everyone should do this because it's commanded, obviously. So then we go, hey, let me give you the skills to get across the street. But everyone isn't necessarily going, yeah, I burned for that. I just don't know how. Some people are, but oftentimes. So, and I think that's a little bit, maybe, Nicole, what you're getting into is that part of discipleship of who I am. Maybe that's where, in the Imago Dei, but it's the heart of the Father, learning that, feeling the impact of that in your life, and then exercising that in your body of who you are. And sometimes like it also takes doing it in order to learn it. So, by the doing, we end up learning about the heart of the Father. So it kind of goes together. I'm not saying we should go and figure out the Father's heart before we ever go and do it. But I think we need to understand how important it is that along the way, people are learning about God and who he is, rather than just a skill set of how-tos.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I think everybody does that. Pastors do it. It doesn't matter what form of ministry you're in, or even if you think that, I don't know, Man U is the best team, your assumptions built into that, you forget that not everyone shares those values.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I would love to say, well, my whole career, I've always had, taught those things really well. I definitely have not. When I go back and look over my life, I'm like, man, I remember when I talked to people about like, how's your spiritual life? As if that was a separate part of their life that wasn't actually integrated in their whole life. And I think, if I could only go back, I'd quit using that phrase. Yeah. How's your life? What's going on in your life? How's Jesus and all of that, not just as a separate part of who you are, but I'm sure.
And that's a, but even that's, I don't know. I know we need to be getting off here as we end, but I think that's part of this whole process too, is even that expression, how's your spiritual life, was a reaction and a cultural adaptation to a reality that was being faced in the, certain areas of time in order to communicate something of relevance in that day. And then, you overswing the pendulum, and now you've got to deal with that reality. So it's
Right.
just and that's why every generation has to raise up new leaders who are tackling the issues.
Yeah.
So, in which to be honest, Nicole, I think you're one of the good leaders in our organization, and so
Thanks, Barry.
I am
you
honored
guys are so
to
nice.
be able to get
Thanks,
to chat
Derek.
with you more, and your wisdom and your insight. There are so many issues that we didn't get to cover. I think maybe we should have you back on to talk.
I think
the
this
race
is a
piece.
good conversation.
Because you wanted to go there, and I actually think that would be interesting. So sorry we didn't get to that. Maybe we'll have you back on for an encore.
I'll do some more work, and then you can have me back on.
That sounds good. Nicole, thank you.
Thanks for having
joining
me.
us. Yeah.
You guys are
great job. Thanks. It was a lot of fun.
Well, it's nice to be hanging out with good friends. It's not a hardship.
That is
I
the
hope
case.
not.
And enjoy some tea and foggy old London town.
Thank you.
Until we see you again.
I think we're having shepherd's pie for lunch.
Oh.
We've been on a bit of a UK food kick here.
I'm about to make pasta.
That's good.
I'll go eat some Swedish meatballs. And with that, we're out of here. Good to see
Bye,
you guys.
guys.
Bye-bye.